Okay, so let's see the Gemara. So yesterday, what we discussed was, according to Rabbi Yosy, if something like kishut is considered dvarim shebeinoi leveino, would Rabbi Yosy hold that you could be made for it? And the Gemara ended up saying, in fact, that you could, because the Gemara brought a raya from a brisa that it was following the sheet of Rabbi Yosy, and the brisa said that someone could be made for his wife's nether if she is forbidding kishut. And that was the maskana of the Gemara, that according to Rabbi Yosy, kishut could be mufar based on the fact that it's dvarim shebeinoi leveino. And all the way at the bottom of the Gemara, 2 lines to the bottom is where we're up to now. On the bottom of Pei Aleph on the base. Rava had a question that he asked of Rab Nachman. And this is the question that he asked. Tashmish Hamita Rabbanan. We know that the Rabbanan said quite clearly in our Mishnah that Rechitza is a matter of Inu Nefesh. He said that the Rabbanan said that Kishut is a matter of Inu Nefesh. What about Tashmish Hamita? Is that Inu Nefesh? Tashmish Hamita Rabbanan is Inu Nefeshu, or is it Dvarim Shebeinoi Lebeino? So the Gemara is assuming for sure that Tanakama would hold that the Afara can be done. The question is it a permanent Afara because it's Inu Nefesh, or it's only a temporary Afara because it's Dvarim Shebeinoi Lebeino? Omar Lei, so Rab Nachman answered, we learned it in a later Mishnah that we're going to have. If a woman said, Unatula ani min Yehudim, what if a woman said she's making a nether that I cannot have tashmish, I am taken away from the Jews, and what that means is that she's answering herself to have done no of tashmish of anybody. And the Gemara and the Brisa says, the Allah is yoper chel koi, he could be made for his chelik. In other words, he can't be made for her isser to be mishamish with anybody else, but relevant to him, he could be made for the nether. But she will remain osir to all other Jews. If you want to suggest that Tashmish is inu nefesh, why do we say that his afar only works relevant to himself, but she's still osir b'tashmish from everybody else? If it's inu nefesh, his afar should be complete and should be mutter to tashmish to anybody. Zok the Gemara, Shema Mina, you see from here that Dvarim Shebeinoi Lebeino Havyon. You see it's Dvarim Shebeinoi Lebeino. But Zok the Gemara, you still don't have a raya according to the Rabbanan, because this brisa of Natula Ani Min Yehudim is not the Rabbanan speaking. It's actually Rabbi Yosy speaking. The Rabbanan Tiboyelach. Why? Mishum de Natula Ani Min Yehudim. Rabbi Yosy Kataniya. It's Rabbi Yosy who's speaking. The Amar Rav Huna, Kulei Pirkin, Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Huna told us that all of the Stam Mishnayos in this entire parak is the Shita of Rabbi Yosy. Mimai, how do we know it's the Shita of Rabbi Yosy? And finally, the Gemara is now going to answer a problem that we had when we were learning the Mishnah. Kivan de Katani Rabbi Yosy Omer, Ein Elu Nidre Inu Nefesh, Lama Leisula Misna, Hareza Yafer Div Rabbi Yosy. Let's go look at the Mishnah inside so we can get clarity in what this kasha is. So the Mishnah that we're focusing on is at the top of that Ayin Tes Amud Beis. They were talking about Kishut and Rechitza, and the Tanakama said these are Nedarim of Inu Nefesh, and on that Rabbi Yosy said Ein Elu Nidre Inu Nefesh. They're not Nidre Inu Nefesh. So the Mishnah clearly announced the appearance of Rabbi Yosy on the scene. Ein Elu Nidre Inu Nefesh. And then Rabbi Yosy continues to speak, and he says, what are Inu Nefesh, Kodim Peiros? And then all the way at the end of the Mishnah, mysteriously, the Mishnah sticks in Divrei Rabbi Yosy. Why does the Mishnah have to say Divrei Rabbi Yosy? We already know Rabbi Yosy speaking. Why is it adding in again Divrei Rabbi Yosy? Zok to Gemara. Rav Huna learns from there that the Tana is trying to tell us that the rest of the parak, unless otherwise specified, is all Rabbi Yosy speaking. So therefore the Gemara says, L'Rabbanan Tiboyela. I'm still going to have a question what the Rabbanan would hold about Tashmish. That later Mishnah, which says clearly that it's the tashmish is nidre shebeinay lebeina. That's not to Rabbanan, that's Rabbi Yosy. Damar Rav Huna kula pirkin Rabbi Yosy. Mimai, how do you know that? Even the Katani Rabbi Yosy Omer ein elu nidre inu nefesh. Since at the top of Ein Testament base, the first line said that Rabbi Yosy entered the scene, and he says that Kishut and Rechitza are not inu nefesh. Lama le sulam misna raise a yafir div Rabbi Yosy. Why at the end of the Mishnah did the Mishnah have to identify again? This is Rabbi Yosy talking. Shema mina mikan ve'lech Rabbi Yosy. It must be to tell you that it's not just that Mishnah that's Rabbi Yosy. Div Rabbi Yosy's entire parak is going according to Rabbi Yosy. So we don't have a raya according to the Rabbanan. We only have a raya according to Rabbi Yosy. So let's see what the Ran says. Inin halacha zok the Ran, kivin the bayan lo yivshita. Since we never were able to prove the shaila according to the Rabbanan, nakdinan lechumra, we paskin lechumra ve'enei mefer el mishum dvarim shebeinoi lebeina. We don't know what the halacha is according to the Rabbanan. We know according to Rabbi Yosy it's dvarim shebeinoi lebeina, so we go lechumra. However, Dr. Ran, there is a man Amar, the Nehidalai of Shita. I'm sorry that on the video my finger is in the wrong place because my computer is going a little haywire, but I am in the Ran. Vikaman Dama, the Nehidalai of Shita, Hacha, even though we don't have a conclusion to the Shaila, according to the Rabbanan, Afilohachi, if Shita Lai Mimemer the Shmuel, the Gemara does conclude that even according to the Rabbanan, it's Dvarim Shebeinai Lebeina. I'm sorry, it's actually Inu Nefesh, and it's a complete afara. Damar Besamach Avlanas Pliny Alai Mefer. We'll see Shmuel's halach in a minute. Zaktiran, I don't believe it's a good raya because Shmuel's not speaking about Tashmish. Shmuel is speaking about something else. Okay, so let's get into the halach of Shmuel. A new halach. Shmuel said, now up until this point, we have in our heads that according to the Tanakama, Kishut, Rechitza is considered Inu Nefesh. According to Rabbi Yosy, that's not Inu Nefesh. So it takes a pretty high bar, threshold, to pass the test of Inu Nefesh. Shmuel brings that bar down a little bit. Amar Shmuel Shmuel Levi, Kol Nedarim Bal Mefer Le'ishtoi. All types of Nedarim, the husband can be Mefer for his wife. Als Inu Nefesh, a permanent hafara for everybody. Chutz min hanaasoi al ploini, hanaasi al ploini. Unless if she says ploini may not have enough for me, that's not inu nefesh for her. If some third party cannot benefit from her, that's not inu nefesh for her. She'enei mefer, that he cannot be mefer. And of course, that's not the dvarim shebeinai lebeina either. If ploini can't have enough from your wife, that's not an issue with you and your wife. So therefore, the husband wouldn't be able to be mefer. Aval, and this is the important point. Hanos ploini alai. What if a woman says about a third party, I'm not going to have enough, Moshe Pipik is also, I'm also to have enough of Moshe Pipik. Mefer, that he could be mefer. That's called inu nefesh. That means I'm not going to have enough from some third party. If she totally prohibits herself to have enough from some third party, that's considered inu nefesh. So that's Shmuel's chiddush. Based on what I've learned up until now, it lowered the bar quite a bit on what it takes to be inu nefesh. Just prohibiting yourself to have anah from one person is inu nefesh.
I don't understand with Tashmi. Why is it one or the other?
Why is what one or the other?
Why can't it be both?
Why can it be inu nefesh and benova? It could be, but we want to know: is it inu nefesh or is it benova? That was the question. It's for sure one of the two. But now we're past the point of tashmish. Now we're up to a whole new question. If a woman says that I'm not I'll ever have enough from Reuven, and this Reuven is not her husband, he's a third party, Shmuel says that's considered inu nefesh.
So that lowers the bar.
I believe so, because it doesn't really impact her life too much.
I'm saying that we're debating is it one or the other. Always.
No, not in Shmuel. Shmuel talking about if it's inu nefesh. It's for sure not. It's for sure not dvarim shebeinai lebeina, right? Tashmish could be beinai lebeina, but saying that I won't have enough from some third party, that's for sure not beinai lebeina. So it's either inu nefesh or nothing at all, and that's why.
No, yeah, for sure.
So Tana. So Shmuel said this halacha that prohibiting yourself to have enough from one person completely, that would be inu nefesh. Tanan we learned in the Mishnah. This is our very Mishnah. What if she said, Peiros Medina Zu Alai? I'm not allowed to have Hano from any pairs of this Medina. That should be the least as bad as saying I won't have enough from this person. Maybe it's even worse. I can't have any pairs from this Medina at all. Yet, what does the Mishnah say? The husband cannot be made for it. The Mishnah says, Yavi law, mi Medina Acheres. So if that's the case, it's very shver on Shmuel. How could Shmuel say that prohibiting yourself from having enough from one person? That's considered in nefesh. We see from the Mishnah that even if you prohibit yourself to have Paris from the whole Medina, that's not in nefesh. Rabbi Yosef, Zok Rabbi Yosef, that's not shver on Shmuel. When our Mishnah said that she prohibited herself to have anah from any pairs from the country of Spain, she meant only if her husband brings them. She said, if you bring me any pairs from Spain, those are asur banah to me. But if anybody else brings me pairs from Spain, that I'm not asring. So that's much less of a problem. So in fact, Avada Shmuel would hold, and Avada the Mishnah would hold that if she prohibited herself from all the pairs from Spain, that would be ini nefesh. That's even more restrictive than not having enough from one individual. But the case of the Mishnah is she didn't even do that. She only prohibited herself from the pairs of Spain that her husband would bring her. That's a very limited issur. That's not inu nefesh, and that's why the Mishnah says that let her bring from a different Medina. The Rama asks to push it the kasha. What's the whole point here? Since I'm only prohibiting pairs that my husband will bring, that's not enough restrictive because my husband could bring me pairs from somewhere else. Why didn't the Mishnah say because anybody else could bring me pairs from that same Medina? I'm not restricting myself to all pairs from Spain. I'm only restricting myself from pairs from Spain that my husband brings for me. But anybody else who would bring me those pairs, that she's not answering. Our Mishnah doesn't say that. Our Mishnah says, let her husband get her pairs from somewhere else. Why didn't we focus on let anybody else bring her pairs from Spain? That's the Ran's kasha. So the Ran answers very simply. The case before it is where she said, all pairs are usher to me. Right? That was the case before. When she says all pairs are usher to me, even Rabbi Yosy said that's called nidre ini nefesh. Well, Zok the Ran, if we're saying that the second case of the Mishnah, when she's telling her husband, all the pairs of this land of Spain are also to me, if we're saying that only means if my husband brings them, well, then you have to interpret the earlier case in the Mishnah under the same circumstances. That when she said all the pairs of the world should be also to me, that also means only if her husband brings them. But if somebody else brings them, then in fact, those pairs will be mutter to her. So Zok the Ran, since that's the case, I'm going to look at the Ran and try. Why did the Mishnah say not that anybody else can get her pairs from Spain? Rather, let her husband get her from a different country. Because if there was no way for her to get pairs through her husband, oh, that's the point. In the earlier case, she said that all the pairs of the world are also to me, right? But that's only also if her husband brings them. If anybody else brings them, it'll be mutter to her. So why is that called a neder of inu nefesh? Why did Rabbi Yosy agree that it's inu nefesh? Because the fact is her husband can't get her pairs from anywhere. And that's restrictive enough because she's prohibiting herself to have hana from any pairs that her husband would bring her. And that's considered enough of a stretch. So avagav is the kantai de'acher mefer. In the case where she asked herself from all pairs, even though she could have had somebody else bring her those pairs, the husband could still be mefer. The Aresha, the Amr Koinen pairs, Olam Alai, the Katani Aresha Yofer, the Aresha said that if she asked herself from all pairs, the husband could be mefer. And it also speaking, it has to be speaking in the same case, because you have to say everything's parallel. The Amr Shatovi Atah Nesukma, Domit Sefer. Fafilochi, nevertheless, in the Resha, Avagav Dislat the Kantai Deacher. In the Resha, even though anybody else could have brought her pairs from anywhere, that would be good for her. Nevertheless, even the less what the Kantai De Baal, since her husband cannot get her any pairs, Katani Areza Yofer, it's still a hafar. Because if she doesn't let herself have anah from any pairs from anywhere in the world, that her husband brings her, it's as if the Havali Kaimeres Hanas Ploni Alai. That's as restrictive as prohibiting yourself from having a no from a person. So therefore, in the Seif of the Mishnah, in order to be able to say that it's not Nidra Inyan Nefesh, it wasn't enough to say that somebody else can get her those pairs. There has to be a way where her husband can get her pairs. And that's why the Mishnah says the reason why it's not Inyan Nefesh, if she's only answering herself in one country, is because her husband can in fact get her pairs from a different country. Beautiful. So the Gemara tried to bring a raya from the Mishnah against Shmuel, and the Gemara says, no, you don't have a raya. In our Mishnah, the reason why it's not a neder of Inu Nefesh is because in the Mishnah's case, she's only answering the pairs of this country that her husband brings for her. But if anybody else brings it for her, she's not answering. Zok Gemara weiter. Tashma. We're still going to ask Kashas on Shmuel. Once again, Shmuel said that if she prohibits herself to have a no, even from one person, that's restrictive enough to be considered Inu Nefesh. So Tashma. Pairs Chenveni Ze Alai. What if she said, this is the next case in our Mishnah, what if she said, all of the pairs of this particular storekeeper are Asr Ba'anah to me? Then Ein Yachal the Gemara, the Mishnah said, that's not called Nidra Inu Nefesh. So once again, what's the difference between saying all the pairs of this Chenveni is Asr to me, or saying this person I'm not allowed to have an offer on? The same way Shmuel said that that's called Inu Nefesh, so by the Chenveni as well should be Inu Nefesh. Yet our Mishnah says if she answers all of the pairs of this Chenveni on her, it's not considered Inu Nefesh. Zok to Gemara, what do you have to say? Hachanami v'ka amra shetabi ata. Once again, the reason why it's not Inu Nefesh when she's prohibiting herself to have pairs of this Chenveni is because she's not totally prohibiting herself from having pairs from this Chenveni, only if her husband goes to that Chenveni and buys them for her. But anybody else, or if she went by herself, Avada, she's not restricting herself. That's why the Mishnah does not consider it Nidra Inu Nefesh. But Zok to Gemara, this pshat so far is very good. So far it fits him perfectly. We're saying that all these cases in the Mishnah are saying which is only answering this particular item if it comes from her husband. But this whole pshat is going to come crashing down now because it will not fit into the final case of the Mishnah. And what's the final case of the Mishnah? The Mishnah said, what if this Chenveni, who she prohibited herself to have an offer from, happens to be the only Chenveni by whom her husband has credit, and therefore, if she's not going to be able to access those payers, she's going to starve because she won't be able to have any payers, then I raise a yofer. The problem is, if you're learning like you're learning, the Amritika Amra Shetaviata, if she's only prohibiting herself from this Chenveni, if her husband brings it, but she herself can go and buy it, am I yofer? Why do we consider that Nidra Inu Nefesh? She can easily go buy those payers for herself and still get credit. Elami de Seifa, Deloy Maisi, Baal, since you're forced to say that when she said in the Seifa, I'm answering myself to have any anah from the pairs of this Chenveni, you're forced to say that no matter who brings those pairs, she's prohibiting herself from it. Because that's the only way you can possibly say that will be Nidra Inu Nefesh, that she's prohibited from having any anah from the pairs of this Chenveni, because this is the only Chenveni she can get, because this is the only Chenveni that she has credit by. So you have to say that speaking, she's not only answering those pairs on her if her husband brings them, but no matter who brings them, she's answering them. Once you say that, Haberesha the Kamaisai, you can no longer argue anywhere in the Mishnah that she was limiting her Isser only to pairs that her husband brings. Because you can't say that the Mishnah is changing around its case. Either all the cases are referring to where she said, I'm only answering these pairs if you, my husband, bring them to me, or all the cases are speaking where no matter who brings them. And from the last case of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah said if she prohibited herself to have enough in the pairs of one Chenveni, but that happened to be a key Chenveni, because that's where she has credit. From the fact that the Mishnah considers that Inu Nefesh, it must be that there's no other way for her to get pairs. And if she's only answering those pairs because it's her husband's getting them, well, then why is that Inu Nefesh? She can go herself shopping and get the pairs there. So LMI, we know that the last case is speaking where she was ushering the pairs of that chenvini on her, no matter who brought them. So therefore, you have to learn the same way into the rest of the Mishnah. So therefore, you're going to have to say El Reisha Ein Yachal Lahaper Udekamai Sehi. You have to say in the Reisha, the case where she said that I'm ushering all the pairs on me. I'm ushering all the pairs on me. Where that's considered nidra in nefesh, but if she said I'm only answering the parish of one medina on me, that's not nidra in nefesh. That has to be speaking not only if her husband brings it, no matter who brings it. And if that's the case, it's Shver on Shmuel who holds that when she answers only one person on her, that's also called in nefesh. So Zoktamar Inachnami, you're right. Our Mishnah is not consistent with Shmuel because our Mishnah holds, in fact, that if she answered the pairs of a whole medina on her, in fact, that would be in nefesh. If she answered the pairs of a person on her, it would not be in nefesh. If she answers the pairs of only one medina, it's not in nefesh. If she answers the hana of one person, it's not in nefesh. Shmuel says it's in nefesh. Shmuel is not going according to Rabbi Yosy. We must listen to Rabbi Yosy. We already said that our Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Yosy. We learned that all the Mishnais, all the Stam Mishnais in our parak is going according to Rabbi Yosy. Rav Huna already told us that all of the Mishnais in our parak is Rabbi Yosy. And therefore, in our Mishnah, it's taka not in nefesh. Umay ein yachal lahafer mishum in nefesh av meifer nedarim shebeinay levin. Rabbi Yosy would hold in our Mishnais that these are not in nefesh, and they're only devarim shebeinay levin. But the Rabbanon might argue on Rabbi Yosy, and the Rabbanon might hold, in fact, that even answering yourself on the no from one person would also be considered inu nefesh, which would allow the husband to be made for it completely, and that's what Shmuel is saying. And that's what the Ran meant before, that there are those who bring a raya from Shmuel. Shmuel holds that even if she answers hana from one person, that's also called inu nefesh. And that's the Shmuel that somebody wanted to bring a raya from, that would hold that tashmish is also inu nefesh. And that's what the Ran says. Just because Shmuel said that if she answers herself to have enough from one person, that's called inu nefesh. Who said tashmish is also considered inu nefesh? Okay, Gaval. So at the end of the day, we weren't able to prove anything from any of the Mishnais in our parak about what the Rabbanan would hold, because all of our Mishnais, the Gemara concludes, are going according to the sheet of Rabbi Yosy. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel has a new art. What happens if she was nodra mishtei kikros v'achas? I'm sorry. She made a neder from two kikros in one neder. She said that these two kikros are also to me, but there was a very big difference between the quality of these two breads. V'achas misana, one was good geshmaka bread, and the fact that you can't eat that bread is inu nefesh. V'achas ein misana. The other bread that she was referring to, that she accepted upon herself in Israel, was very low grade bread. So it's not inu nefesh, but it's all one neder. So you cannot be made for a half a neder. And the husband was made for the neder because part of it was inu nefesh, meaning the good bread. Zokt Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, mitoich shu mefer limisana, since he has the right to be made for her neder regarding the loaf of bread that was the high quality, because that's considered in nefesh, mefer l'she'ein misana. He could also be made for the whole neder. Rabbi Asi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, you split it. Mefer l'misana, his afar only works for half the neder, for the isser of the bread that causes her grief if she won't eat it because it's high quality bread. They mefer l'she'ein misana. Let's see the Ran, how the Ran explains this machlokes. Zog the Heilige Ran. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel nodra b'shtei kikros kegoyin the Amra shtei kikros elu alai. She said in the one neder, these two loaves of bread should be also to me. V'achas misana, one of them is hard for her not to eat. She pas nikia, it's quality bread. V'achas ein misana, she pas kibar, it's very poor quality bread. Mitoich shehu mefer l'misana mipnei sheyesh ba'inu nefesh, since the bread that's high quality is inu nefesh for her, so her husband could be made for her. His afar works for her whole neder. Mefer l'shein misana, even though the other bread that she's refraining from eating, there is no inu nefesh involved. Why? How does that work? The kivan tishtayin dvar achila. Since they're both edible. Mefer l'she'ein misana begrora de misana. The hafara that she made on the piece of bread that was high quality, which she had a right to make hafara on, it'll automatically roll over and impact the neder that's not in nefesh, the neder that's on the piece of bread that's poor quality. Even if he didn't speak out beferish on being made for both nedarim, even if he just said mufar, we say that her whole neder is removed, not only on the piece of bread that was in nefesh. Rabbi Asi Omer B'Yochanan says not like that. Rather, made for the misana, they made for the shein misana. He cannot be made for the part of the nether that's not in it. Why? He doesn't hold that the hafar on half the nether rolls over onto the rest of the nether. Even if he said beferish, I want to be made for the piece of bread that causes her grief, and the ein misana, he specifically says, I also want to be made for the nether on the piece of bread that's poor quality. Nevertheless, ein mufer l'she'ein misana. His afara will not work on the piece of bread that there's no ein nefesh on. Kach pirshu Rabbi said, that's what my rabbi said. V'lo re'isi la'echad mehem v'grara d'shmuel tam lama. I don't see any explanation as to why it should work. Why should it work? If I'm allowed to be made for the nether of inu nefesh, so why does it automatically roll over to the other kikar? So they're rather struggling to understand how that works. This is what the machlokes Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan is about. Mishum the krok siv, it says in the pasuk, Isha yikimenu, Isha yiferenu. Umafkinim ha'ekra l'kamon. And later on in the Gemara learns from this pasuk, the tzarech habal sheyoper kol neder. It says Isha Yafirenu is referring to the entire nether. In order for her hafara to be a good hafara, it has to be a hafara on the entire nether. The Yafirenu kula mashma. When it says Isha Yafirenu, it's mashma that he's being made for. He's dissolving the entire nether. Bimhavar miktsasai, if he's only going to be made for part of the nether, then afilu masha hafar ain't mufa. His hafara won't work. It's either all or nothing. You either make a hafara or you don't make a hafara. Shekachi Iker Hagirsa B'Ushmaitze D'Lakamon. That's the main girsa in that sugya that we'll get to later. We're going to already explain that when we get there. Therefore, since hafar is all or nothing, since her nether was a nether on both kikrais, hare nether echad. You look at it as it's one big nether. The Evshel hafar l'chatzayin. You cannot be made for halfway. You have renixit. Mishum hachi therefore is up to ran. Since he needs to be made for the nether on the kikar that's high quality, and he's able to be made for the part of the nether, the kikar that there is inu nefesh, therefore made for gamkein l'she'ein misana. Therefore we say his afara works for the other one as well. The amat le'motzi meipar, if you're going to say that his afara won't work on that half, well then his afara even on the kikar that she is misana by not eating, that won't be a good afara either. So maybe Taka not a good afar at all. Who said he has a right to be made for such a nether? Maybe he can't be made for such a nether that has two components in it. Since the Torah gave the husband the power to be made for any nedarim that have inu nefesh, al karchach made for af b'shein misana. The Torah must be telling you that any nether of inu nefesh you can be made for, no matter what has to come out as a byproduct of that, which means if because of that your nether is going to have to, your hafar is going to have to roll over onto another part of the nether that in fact is not in your nefesh, it doesn't matter because we're giving you absolute power. The Torah is giving the husband absolute power to be made for any nether of in nefesh. Therefore, it'll be mufar even if there is some other nether that's wrapped into that nether. The misana, the she'ein misana told you, since he cannot be made for the nether of inu nefesh, unless he's also made for the other nether, because it's one nether, and like we said, it's all or nothing. The amat le'motzi meifar ikinu nefesh. At the end of the day, why does the Torah give a husband the schus to be made for a nether of inu nefesh? Because the Torah doesn't want to give the husband the right to protect his wife from being a nefesh. So if the Torah is going to say when it's coupled with another nether, because you can't be made for the other nether, you won't be able to be made for this nether either, well then ultimately we're leaving her exposed, because now he won't be able to protect her from Inu Nefesh. So in order to give him absolute power to be able to protect her from Inu Nefesh, we have to give him the ability to be made for the nether, even though there's a part of it that's not Inu Nefesh, but al yidei grora, it'll take the whole nether out. So you can't have half, because half never works. So therefore, since you could only have all or nothing, and we want to give them the power to be made for any nether of Inu Nefesh, in a case where they're coupled together, the fire will spread even on the part of the nether that does not be Inu Nefesh. Rabbi Asi Amar B'Yochanan, mefer l'masana, ve'ein mefer l'mashein l'masana. Rabbi Asi said, no, you split it. He only has the right to make hafara on the part of the nether that is Inu Nefesh, but not another part. How does he justify that? Very interesting. The Svirle, the Nehid, the Yafirenu, Amar Achmana. We told you there's a rule. You have to be made for the whole nether, all or nothing. But it doesn't mean the whole nether. It means the whole nether that you have the ability to be made for. The mashma kule v'loy palga, even though the pashas is that when you're made for the nether, it's all or nothing. Hainu loimer shetzorich lahaper kol haneder sheyachal lahaper. That just means that it's not a good afara unless whatever part of the nether is inu nefesh that you're able to be made for. Unless you're made for all of that, your afara is not a good afara. Yafirenu the kra, when the Torah says Yafirenu, it's only referring, of course, to the part of the nether that the Torah gave a husband the ability to be made for. Ainu nefesh kol. Hilchach kol she'evar kol ma sheyesh ba'inu nefesh. Since he was made for all of the nether that had involved inu nefesh, b'hachi sagi, that's considered a full hafara. The Yafirenu krinabe. We would call it Yafirenu. We wouldn't call it a half hafara. So at the end of the day, the Nakudas Habaya, the Nakuda upon which they're arguing is when the Torah says you have to be made for the whole nether. Now, part of the nether, does that mean the whole nether in its entirety, like Shmuel said? Or does that mean the whole nether that you have the ability to be made for, and therefore you only have to be made for the part that has Inu Nefesh? Beautiful. So that was the shot. Boy, Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Yochanan, Nadru b'shtei kikros, ba'ach b'sana, ba'ach ein b'sana, ma'u, amalei mefer l'masana, ve'mefer l'shein b'sana. He holds you could be mefer. So that was the Ikadamri. So the first Gemara quoted a machlokes, Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Nadru b'shtei kikros, ba'ach b'sana, ba'ach ein b'sana, v'toich shu mefer l'masana, mefer l'shein b'sana. And Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Yochanan said, mefer l'masana, ve'mefer l'shein b'sana. The Ikadamri, there's another nusach that the question was posed to Rabbi Asi. Okay, we still have some time, so we'll move on a little bit to learn weiter. The Gemara Akasha on Shmuel. What happens if a woman made a nether, she was makabel upon herself, Nazirus? And even though she was makabel upon herself Nazirus, she was ignoring her commitment, and she was drinking wine, and she was being metamet to mason. The halach is harezeh sefeges es harboim. She gets malchus because she violated her Nazirus. What happens if Hofer la baila? Her husband was made for her Nazirus. He was mevatel her Nazirus, but he lo yodo shahafer la. But she didn't know that the Nazirus was gone. She was violating her Nazirus, thinking that she was doing an Aveira, but in fact, her Nazirus was no longer valid. Then Enes Hevegas is over. She will not get Malchus. For Gemara, the Amrit Mefer L'Misana, Vein Mefer L'Shein Misana. If you say that the Afara only works, so it was it was not a Kasha of Shmuel, it's a Kasha of Abashim of Yochanan. If you're going to say that when there's part of a nether that is inu nefesh, and part of it is not inu nefesh, when the Baal is mefer, he's only made for the part that's inu nefesh. Well, dilma min yayin the islat tzayir hafarle. Sure, if she drinks wine, that's inu nefesh. So his afar on the Nazirus will take away the isser to drink wine. But min chartzin min zog lo hafarle. But from eating seeds or the skin of the grape, his afar wouldn't have an impact on that, because there's no inu nefesh in not eating seeds. There's no inu nefesh in not eating the skin of the grape. And therefore, why shouldn't she get malchus for eating for eating the parts of the grape. Let's see the halach around. The tisbag is dilma miyayin isla tzayra, and therefore hafala. The haydam rinon dilma lav dafka. The afilu hafala behedya mizag v'chartin. You can't say that he didn't have in mind, because even if he specifically said, I want to be made for her Naziris, and I want to allow her to eat zog and chartin, Rabbi Yochanan the Amar ein mefer l'shein misana. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that he cannot be mefer a part of a nether that there's no inu nefesh on, loy mahami. Even if he spoke it out first that he's trying to be mefer, it wouldn't work. Like we said earlier, the tisbeg is our boy. Let her get malchus for eating the chartzanim and the zag, where the husband's afara does not work. The misa the hachihu havel the tana lashminon hachrabusa. The Tana should have made it clear. And for the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosef, ein Naziris lachatzoyin. You cannot have a half Naziris. Zoktiran, the kivin lemishkachas Naziris shlo yochel afal zog v'chartan. You'll never find a Naziris that will only prohibit her from drinking wine, but will not prohibit her from eating the seeds of the grape or from eating the skin. You can't split it. Therefore, ki Amar Achmanu Yifirenu, the mashmakuloi al karchen afilu al zag v'chartan cover. Where does Rabbi Yochanan say you split the nether? That's if she made another on this kikar and on that kikar, so his afara could be complete if it's only on one kikar. But Naziris is one unit. It's not a series of Isurim, it's one unit of Naziris. Once he's being made for her Naziris, Lagabe Yayin, it's automatically mufer for everything else as well, and it cannot be split. Okay, let's stop here, and we'll be Mamshach Bez Hashem tomorrow. And I'll try to get this computer issue solved by then, because I think it's starting to get a little bit annoying. So I apologize for that. Go ahead.